So in the spirit of our message, God has a sense of humor because everything we've been talking about today calls us to courage. And our message today is going to be about courage. But I want to be honest with you. I couldn't say everything I just said without also saying, I have days where I am unsure. I have felt this passion and thing that God has laid on my heart. And I wake up some days and I'm like, I'm so excited. I'm going after it. I'm starting to do all the things I need to do. And then I have days like yesterday where I am in panic mode. It's as if, I've been telling people who have been asking me, it's as if I see a direction, but the path is uncertain. I kind of know I'm supposed to go this way, but getting there. Some days I'm like, God, I don't know. Are you sure? Is this really what you called me to? And so in God's great sense of humor, he asked and scheduled me to preach on courage today. So this sermon is just as much to me as it is for all of you here. So here's the question to open us up. What do you do in life when your courage fails you? Because it is inevitable that things happen. We're going to step into situations where no matter how well we've prepared, how strong we are, something will happen where we falter. Maybe we weren't as prepared as we thought. Maybe we stepped in a wrong direction and find ourselves in a situation where it's like, oh no, I'm not ready for this. What do you do when that happens? When you lose your courage, how do you get it back? Have you ever faced a situation where maybe you felt God either called you in a certain direction or you really wanted to step forward into something, and maybe it was a really good thing, and you did, but then when you got there, all of a sudden, all of that excitement and the courage and the strength just kind of wilted away? Think about a time in your life where maybe that happened, big or small, and how did you feel? See, here's what's hard is that the current advice in our world, especially for those of us who live around here, around Chester County, which is the healthiest, wealthiest, most educated place in Pennsylvania, the advice is going to say something like this. Well, just put your head down, grit through it, work harder, block out the noise, put the weight of your future on your shoulders, get after it. Now, what's hard is that there's a kernel of truth in that. There is something to the fact that we should be hard workers, we should be dedicated, we should at times put our head down, we should at times block out the noise that we shouldn't be listening to. But I'm sure you can feel the problem with that. When you live day after day, moment after moment with this grind it out, put your head down, block out everything, my future is mine to control, what happens when you get to a place where you can't control your future? If you subscribe to this model of I'm just going to grind it out and I'm going to achieve the mountaintop and it is on me and my shoulders to do so, your entire future rests on your shoulders. If you fail, you failed. You weren't good enough. You couldn't grind it out hard enough. You have to carry the weight of expectation on you and you alone. And the lie that is exposed in this worldview is that it assumes there's only one agency at work in your life. It's you, and you alone. You bear everything that has to do with your future. As I said, it's inevitable that things happen in life. No one's story turns out exactly how they plan. Stuff happens. You know what hits the fan. It's going to happen. So what, I ask you, do you do when you're faced with something? Maybe it's something amazing. Maybe it's a place God has called you. Or maybe you stepped out somewhere and you're like, you know what? That might not have been the best place to go. What do you do to get your courage back? We're going to dig into this through one of the most well-known stories in the Old Testament. Today we're going to get to talk about David and Goliath. Now, this story is so familiar in some ways that we all kind of assume we know what happens and how it happens and what the story is about. And the story has even kind of worked itself into cultural myth. In sports, if a team that's not supposed to win has a great day and defeats one of the best teams in the league, we say, look, that's a David and Goliath moment. So we kind of have this idea of what the story is about. So I want to ask you today, if you will, this one time, imagine you've never heard this story before. Imagine as we read parts of it and walk through it, this is the first time you're ever hearing this story from Scripture. And try to listen for what God might be telling us today. I'm going to be listening for what God is calling me and my family to. I want you to do the same. What does God have to tell you today through this story? So I can't possibly read the whole story. It's over 60 verses. We would be here until about 11:30. So instead of doing that, I'm going to do my best to just be a good storyteller. I'm going to read just small passages of the story, and then we'll just work through it. And we'll talk about what's happening, what's going wrong, and what God is doing to respond. So, if you will, let's dig in. I'm going to start by reading the first part of the story. So this is the context. We're kind of plopped into a situation here. This is 1 Samuel 17, and this starts at verse 1. And the words will be up on the screen for you to be able to follow along. So the story starts like this. Now the Philistines gathered their forces for war and assembled at Succoth in Judah. Saul and the Israelites assembled and camped in the valley of Elah and drew up their battle line to meet the Philistines. The Philistines occupied one hill and the Israelites another, with the valley between them. A champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out of the Philistine camp. Goliath stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Why do you come out and line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine and you are not the servants of Saul? Choose a man and have him come down to me. If he is able to fight and kill me, we will become your subjects. But if I overcome him and kill him, you will become our subjects and serve us." Then the Philistines said, "This day I defy the armies of Israel. Give me a man and let us fight each other." On hearing the Philistines' words, Saul and all the Israelites were dismayed and terrified. So we are plopped right into the middle of a battle that is getting ready to ensue. So as people, imagine you've never heard this before. We're being plopped into this, and think about what you just heard. There's two massive armies on two hills and a valley in between. So we're already set up for like this great gladiator war scene thing that's about to happen. So what would you expect? You would expect on one side, there's an army who hates the other side, and then on the other side, that army hates them, and everyone is gearing up and ready. They have some nervous energy, but they are roaring and ready to go. That's actually the opposite of what we are told. Somehow, the people of God have come up ready for battle, and then when they look at what's in front of them, they're completely dismayed and terrified. Now, this isn't just the type of fear you would expect. If you were in this army and you looked across at this other side and you saw this great warrior and rank upon rank of Philistine soldiers, it's normal to be afraid. It would be expected to have some sort of nervous energy and excitement and a little bit of fear, but you're still kind of, when your brothers go, you're ready to go. That's not what's described here. Actually, the way the story is described, the Israelites get to the top of the hill, they look out, and everything describes them as if they are frozen in fear. They cannot take another step forward. They cannot respond to anything that's now happening in front of them. How did we get here? Quickly, we have to look back a few chapters to see how we got to this point. So, a few chapters ago, the Israelites came to their prophet named Samuel, and they said, "Samuel, we want a king just like the other nations. We want to be just like the other nations." Now, having a king is actually not wrong. In Deuteronomy, God says Israel could one day have a king. The problem is how and why they are wanting a king. So look here, and this will be on the screen, these two short verses from 1 Samuel 8. Here's what they say to the prophet Samuel. They say, "Now appoint a king to lead us, such as all the other nations have." And then a few verses later, after Samuel has tried to tell them, listen, this might not go the way you expect, it says, the people refused to listen to Samuel. "No," they said, "we want a king over us. Then we will be like all the other nations, with a king to lead us and to go out before us and fight our battles." So notice, on one hand, Just wanting a king, it's not a bad thing. Wanting someone to be a leader, not a bad thing. But that's not actually what they're asking. They're telling Samuel, we look out at the nations and we see how they work, how successful they may be. We want someone like that to lead us. They see this Goliath figure who is strong and intimidating and leading the Philistines, and they say, Samuel, we want that. We want something we can see, something we can touch, something we can put our faith and our trust in who's going to lead us out in battle. The problem with this is that they already had someone who was with them and led them in battle. In Deuteronomy, God, speaking to the Israelites, says this. This is God speaking. The Lord your God, who is going before you, will fight for you, as he did for you in Egypt, before your very eyes. And then a little bit later, again, God speaking, says this. For the Lord your God is the one who goes with you to fight for you against your enemies, to give you victory. Over and over again in the Old Testament, we are told by the narrator and by God himself that it is God who has rescued Israel, who has led them forth, who goes out before them and fights their battles. So hear now what the people are telling to Samuel. Samuel, it's hard to trust God. Yes, he's done things for us, but things have also been really hard. The history leading up through Judges and now 1 Samuel in the story has not been kind to the Israelites. And so, Samuel, can we just have a king like the nations around us? Someone that I can see and touch and talk to, and I can watch lead us out in battle. Someone who can go fight Goliath so I don't have to. Can I just put my faith and trust in him? And so, interestingly, God gives them what they want. God says, okay. And he anoints a king called Saul, and he gives them to the Israelites. And Saul is everything you could want in a king. He's tall. He's strong. He can use a sword. He's described as a good son. He literally ticks all the boxes. Multiple times in the story, in an almost funny way, he's described as being taller than everyone else. He is just good looking. He is the type of king we've wanted all along. So again, you would expect they have what they want. This was a good thing, right? We have someone to lead us out in battle. So here we are, irony of ironies, standing in front of the nations, in front of their warrior, and our warrior king is hiding in his tent, unable to come out. We are full of fear. The story says multiple times that every time Goliath comes out, they run away. They can't respond. It's like they're frozen in place. So notice what is happening here now in the story when we put all these pieces together. The people of God are standing in front of an intimidating situation. They went forward to confront their enemies, but they're frozen. But these people are not just abstract humans in a story. This is the people of God. This is Israel. They have a God who has led them, who has delivered them, who has worked intimately in their lives over and over and over. But currently in the story, they act as if they don't have a God. He hasn't shown up for us. We had a king who was going to do that, but now he's hiding in his tent. When we forget what God has done for us, how God has shown up in our lives before, one of the things that can happen is we become short-sighted. And we don't do this intentionally, but what happens is we begin to lose courage. We begin to not have a sense of hope or faith that things can change when we look out at what's happening in front of our eyes. When we no longer trust in the God who's shown up for us in the past, we live with the sense that everything is now up to us. I have to go fight Goliath. My king that I put my trust in is in his tent. I can't fight Goliath. They stopped trusting in God, the God who had shown up for them, and they put in all their chips into something that seemed like a good thing to trust in. But now they're crushed with fear. Here's one takeaway, I think, from this first part of the story. When you don't or you can't remember how you've been delivered in the past, you have no hope of being delivered in the present. When your future sense of security and identity now in the present moment rests solely on your shoulders to get it done, when that falls apart, when you have a Goliath in front of you, what hope do you have? So what are they supposed to do? What are the Israelites, what are we in a situation like this supposed to do? We've lost all of our courage. We're frozen in fear. We're living in this now moment where we no longer remember our past. We no longer can see where we're going, and we just see the Goliath standing in front of us. It's at this point in the story that David shows up. And so, quick context for David at this point in the story. He is a teenager. Scholars debate how old he is at this point, but the range typically given is 14 to 17. So he is classically in that gangly teenager stage where he hasn't grown into his adult body. He has all the confidence in the world, but we're given more details. He's a shepherd boy. He is not, interestingly, he's not described as a warrior. He takes care of sheep. He's also the eighth born in his family. So culturally, he's just like the forgotten child. He's the eighth born. He takes care of the sheep. He's the teenager. That's David. He's over there. We don't really need to worry about him. So this is the David that shows up. So notice, this is not the King David we tend to think of. This is awkward, teenager, bombastic, sheep-watching David. So now I'm going to read, here's the next little bit of the story. This is when David comes on the scene. And notice the differences between the Israelites and then David when he comes. So here's what the story says. David left his things with the keeper of supplies, and he ran to the battle lines, and he asked his brothers how they were. So notice, he's not a part of the battle. He's off watching sheep. As he was talking with them, Goliath, the Philistine, champion from Gath, stepped out from his lines, and he shouted his usual defiance, and David heard it. Whenever the Israelites saw the man, they all fled from him in great fear. David asked the men standing near him, "What will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" What David said was then overheard and reported to Saul. So Saul sent for him. David said to Saul, "Let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go fight him." Saul replied, "You're not able to go out against this Philistine and fight him. You're only a young man, and he's been a warrior from his youth." But David said to Saul, "Your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it. I struck it, and I rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, and I struck it, and I killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of the Philistine." What a great line. Now, do you notice the drastic difference between the responses of the Israelites and David? David does essentially two things that I think are drastically important for us to see. In the first half of the story, the people of God do not mention God once. So they've stepped up to fight the Philistines, and God is never mentioned. They don't talk about him. They don't remember him. He just isn't brought up. David shows up on the scene. The first words out of his mouth is that he names God. He doesn't just talk about God. He actually names him. So notice this line. He says, who is this Philistine? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? So in English, that just sounds like he's talking about God, but really, he's drawing very specific reference to the God of Israel who has shown up in the past. So this is the living God, the God we know, the God who has delivered us, the God who rescued us from Egypt. You could name multiple examples. This is not just, I believe in God because of X, Y, and Z. This is, I know God because X, Y, and Z. So he names God. This is a personal identification. David is talking here as if he actually knows this God, has a relationship with this God, has interacted with this God. And so the outsider, the teenager, the eighth born, the non-warrior is the one in the story to call everyone's attention to the living God. Now, we haven't mentioned that this whole situation has been going on for 40 days. So the army showed up, one on one hill, one on the other, in the valley between. And the story says for 40 days, Goliath would come forward and taunt and challenge the Israelites. And for 40 days, they were unable to take a step, to respond, to do anything. Saul has been in his tent for 40 days, unable to meet the challenge. God is not mentioned once in 40 days. David shows up and he says, wait a second, how dare you let that man taunt our God? We know our God and what he can do. So Saul hears this. And imagine Saul's in his tent and a teenager is out there talking to his troops about how could you guys let this be happening? So Saul says, come here. He wants to talk to David. And so David comes in and he says, listen, I'll fight Goliath. And there's a comedic element to this story. You should see what's happening as just like a little bit crazy. This gangly teenager is like, I'll fight the 7-foot-tall, fully armored warrior man. And the king of Israel is like, no, because if you lose, we're going to be their servants. So what is David's response? And I think this is the whole point of the story right here. David gives a testimony to Saul. He tells him a story. He says, yeah, but when I've been watching the sheep, a lion came one time, and I chased him away, and then I caught up with him, and I killed him. And then another time, a bear showed up, and I fought off that bear too, and I killed him. What? Saul's probably like, who is this kid? And what is happening? But remember, at the beginning, we talked about how the lie of our culture is that if you're just strong enough, if you're good enough, you can grit your way through. It's easy to hear what David is saying here is saying that, but that's not what he's saying. He's saying, listen, I had to fight a bear and a lion to save my sheep, and God delivered me from the bear and the lion. So of course God's going to deliver me from this Philistine as well. This is not actually about how strong David is at all. It's about the God that he knows that can deliver him from what seems like a crazy, impossible, wild situation. This story is so great and has so many layers and details that we can't get into. But we need to be careful to not turn this story into simply something about a boy who goes from nothing to everything. This is not just about how strong David is compared to everybody else. This is actually not like Gladiator. David does have immense courage, and he does accomplish a great feat that we'll read about in a second. But there is something very weird and strange and comedic about this story. David, his reason for fighting the 7-foot-tall warrior man is that I fought a lion and a bear, and it was God's doing. I don't know how else to describe that as if that's what faith sounds like. It doesn't make sense. It isn't, by all appearances, doesn't make any sense. Last week, Mark talked about the problem of appearances. All of us and the Israelites in the story are functioning off of what they can see. And what they're seeing is intimidating. I wouldn't want to fight Goliath. Do you want to fight Goliath? No. But we were told last week that God does not function or work off of appearances. God looks at the heart. What God does is not what we expect him to do. By all appearances, if you were Saul, if I was Saul, I would say the exact same thing. There's no way I'm letting a gangly teenager go fight the warrior of the Philistines. But David says, I know my God who has delivered me in the past. He's going to do it again. So now here comes the part of the story that all of us probably know. David, and just hear how crazy this is. David, without any armor, without any weapons, charges towards Goliath. Goliath is described as something like 7 feet tall. He's probably like an MMA fighter, like just huge. And the part of the story we didn't read was an entire paragraph that details what his armor looks like. He's covered head to toe in scale armor and has a shield bearer. So the gangly teenager runs with no armor and no weapons and simply picks up a few rocks and has a sling with him, and he's going off. He's like, I got it. I got him. Now, this is what I love about Scripture. There's so many layers here. When God gave the law to his people, one of the laws was what to do with someone who commits blasphemy. Blasphemy is simply a way of talking about cursing God. Goliath, this entire story, has been described as taunting, challenging, and cursing the armies of the God of Israel. David knows his God and his law. What you do with someone who commits blasphemy is you stone them. So David picks up stones, and he has a sling, and this isn't like a sling you pull back like this. It's one of the ones that you have to do this, you throw it. So if you've seen VeggieTales, like any good millennial, you know what's about to happen. The giant pickle is about to fall. David slings the rocks. He stones the blasphemer. Goliath falls, and David runs, and he picks up Goliath's own sword, and he cuts off his head. It's R-rated Bible stories. It's an awesome ending to a story. But here's the point of this entire story. It's easy to read this as if, look how amazing David is. Look how strong David is. Look how courageous David is. And he is. He is courageous. He is stepping out in faith. He is, by all appearances, doing something that I don't know if I would do. Saul wouldn't do. The armies of Israel wouldn't do. But here's the point. David's courage comes not from himself, not from his idea of what he can do. It comes from knowing the God of Israel, who has shown up for him in the past, and believing that he's going to provide and show up and protect him again in the future. I've shared multiple times with you all in different contexts that I grew up in a Pentecostal household. A fairly unique one because my whole family is Southern, so they're from North Carolina, Louisiana, Alabama, but somehow they all ended up in Michigan. So I grew up in a Southern Pentecostal home in the middle of the Midwest. There's lots of ideas and theories about what it means to be a Pentecostal, but if I had to say there's one thing, I'm going to boil this down to one thing. What did it look like growing up? It was that we told stories over and over and over. We told stories. The Pentecostal way of talking about this is we would testify. And what would happen is we would sit around the dinner table, we'd be in the living room, we'd be at church, we'd be in the car, and someone would start talking about what God has done in the past. Now, sometimes this was a story about something miraculous that had happened. So I could spend time up here telling you about the story about how my grandmother was miraculously healed of cancer. She had cancer one day, the next day was gone. Lots of other stories, though, were simply something like this. We're eating dinner, and someone's like, last Tuesday, I prayed to God, and he showed up. And it was it's just a little thing. It's not miraculous. It's just God showed up. What happens to you when you live in an atmosphere where people are constantly reminding each other of what God does, of how God shows up? Think about what that does to your psyche and your sense of what you can do in life because you know this God. I've also shared with you that I spent my teenage years doing my best atheist impression. I did not want to believe anything my family had to say, and I thought, and I still think, I can come up with some pretty good rational arguments for why I shouldn't believe some of this stuff. But you know what I can't get away from? The stories, the testimonies, the testifying of my grandmothers and my grandfathers. I grew up hearing, hundreds, maybe even 1,000 stories of how God has shown up for my family and my friends and my sister and my mom in little ways and big ways every single day of their life. Here's what I want to share with you today. The Israelites in this story went out to battle, not trusting God. They said, God, I don't want to trust in you anymore. I want a king. They got themselves in this sticky situation. What does God do? He still shows up in an unexpected way. He shows up in the form of a gangly teenager with no armor and no weapons, and he defeats what's standing in front of his people. The end of the story is that all of a sudden, when David cuts off the head of Goliath, it's almost like it surges through the army. Everyone regains their courage, and they rush forward following David. What they're really doing is rushing forward, following the God who's leading them like he always has been. Our courage comes from remembering that our God is a God who always and has shown up for us. I want to encourage you today. You maybe did not grow up in a Pentecostal house like I did, where it was very normal and commonplace to testify. This might be like, wow, that sounds cool, but I've never really heard anything like that. I bet if you went home today, and if you just started thinking a little bit about how you got to here, like where you are right now in life, and just with your spouse, with your friend, with your mom, start talking about the course of your life. I guarantee you'll start asking questions like, wait a second, how did that happen? How did I meet that person? How did I get out of that situation? It's easy to forget what God has done for us and how he's shown up for us. The good news is that we can be reminded by each other. You might be having a day where you're like, God has never shown up for me. My life sucks. Everything has been against me in my life. And the person next to you can be like, yeah, but I've seen, but I've heard, and you know what? I actually have seen in you how God has shown up for you. We can call it out of each other. That is where our courage comes from. So contrary to our culture, you don't have to grind it out every day. It isn't actually all on your shoulders. If you are a believer in Jesus, you're going to be okay. He is a God who shows up over and over. The last thing I want to share with you, and this I was not expecting to share. This morning when I sat down in my chair, one of the things I've been doing is just reading the Psalm a day. And again, here is God's great love and grace and providence. The psalm that I opened up to today that was next in line was Psalm 124. This was not planned, but I want you to hear this because I think this is for all of us in the room today. Listen to how this psalm goes. If the Lord had not been on our side, let Israel say, if the Lord had not been on our side, when people attacked us, they would have swallowed us alive. When their anger flared against us, the flood would have engulfed us. The torrents would have swept over us. The raging waters would have swept us away. Praise be to the Lord, who has not let us be torn by their teeth. We have escaped like a bird from the fowler's snare. The snare has been broken, and we have escaped. Our help is in the name of the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. Call on the name of the Lord today and remember what he's done for you. Will you pray with me? Jesus, thank you for today. I thank you for the fact that we don't have to carry the burden of our life all on our own. We don't have to pull ourselves up out of the pit on our own. We don't have to figure out our futures on our own. I ask that you be kind in bringing people around us to remind us what they see in our lives, how you've shown up for us, how you've provided, how you've cared for us, how you've made things happen out of impossible circumstances, Father. Help us to remember that you are a God who does incredible things. You make something out of nothing, even when we're struggling to put our faith in you. Remind us of this today and continue to call us into all the places you're calling us. Help us to put our faith and our trust in you, in the God who always shows up. Amen.